The moment I smelled smoke and saw the fire truck slam into our community gate like a steel battering ram, I knew Karen had finally outdone herself. And when the firefighters scrambled out screaming that the exits were welded shut, I didn't even blink. I just pulled out my phone, scrolled to the time-stamped photo I'd taken 9 minutes earlier, and walked it straight over to the fire marshal. The look on his face as he read her name on the HOA directory was a once-in-a-lifetime gift. I didn't need to say a word. Karen had made her bed, complete with ornamental wrought iron bars, and I was about to help tuck her in with it. This wasn't some long-brewing neighborhood feud. I'd only moved in 2 months ago. My house was a foreclosure I picked up cheap with the intention of flipping. It was a basic suburban 2-story at the back end of a gated community that thought it was fancier than it was. They called it Lake Haven, though the only body of water here was a sad, chlorinated retention pond pretending to be a lake, which smelled like warm nickels after rain. The HOA, however, acted like it was Beverly Hills. From the moment I moved in, I could feel the eyes on me, mostly from the woman in a pressed white blouse who walked her schnauzer precisely 3 times a day like she was timing a parade route. That was Karen Delacroix, the president of the HOA, the self-appointed guardian of aesthetic order, and a woman whose voice sounded like someone trying to whisper a scream. I'd barely unloaded my second box when she showed up at my front door holding a clipboard like it was a summons. "Your trash bins are visible from the street," she said by way of greeting. "No name. No welcome. Just that. They must be stored behind a privacy fence or in your garage. It's in the bylaws." I pointed to the open garage door where my bins sat neatly aligned, waiting for the trash pickup that hadn't even happened yet. "And yet," I said, "they are currently in the garage, which is technically behind a garage door. That's privacy, no?" Her eyes narrowed like I'd just spoken Latin backward. "We'll see," she said, scribbling something. "Welcome to Lake Haven." That set the tone. Over the next few weeks, Karen hit me with no fewer than 11 violation notices, each more absurd than the last. One for not edging my lawn to the exact 2-inch border required. One for a garden gnome I didn't even own. I later realized it was on the neighbor's lawn, not mine. My personal favorite was the warning for unsanctioned driveway activity, after I changed my own oil. It became clear this wasn't about me violating rules. It was about Karen asserting dominance. I was a new variable. A man who hadn't attended any of her 6-hour HOA board meetings where she assigned volunteer positions like she was forming a secret society. I hadn't bowed to the unspoken hierarchy. And worse, I didn't care. Then came the gate situation. Lake Haven had 1 main entrance and 2 electronic exit gates. One on the north side and a smaller one on the south end near the pond. I quickly discovered that the south gate was a crucial shortcut during rush hour, especially when the main road was clogged. But one afternoon, I drove up and found it blocked with cones and caution tape, a handwritten sign that read, "Temporarily closed for safety upgrades, HOA authorized." Except no contractor was present. No workers. No safety upgrades. Just cones and a lock. Karen had clearly added herself. I checked the community email thread. No mention of any maintenance. So I did what any rational person would. I opened the lock with a pair of bolt cutters and drove through. Then I emailed the HOA with a simple question. Who authorized the gate to be closed without community vote or permit approval? No reply for 2 days. Then I got a formal violation letter, certified mail, no less, accusing me of destruction of HOA property and breach of community safety protocol. Karen had clearly escalated. So I responded with a scanned photo of the city zoning code, highlighting the clause that required all gated communities to maintain 2 egress routes at all times for emergency vehicles. I copied the fire department on it. 3 days later, the gate was reopened without fanfare. No apology. No explanation. But I could tell by Karen's expression when she passed me on her 3 p.m. schnauzer walk that she was seething. It wasn't just about rules anymore. It was personal. That's when I started noticing her patrols. She'd take longer routes with her dog. Slower, looping walks that coincidentally passed my house 3 or 4 times a day. She'd pause to stare at my grass, my mailbox, my siding. Once, she even stooped down and measured the distance from my front step to the curb using one of those wheeled tape measures. I watched her from my window, sipping iced tea like I was at a wildlife preserve. But things turned truly bizarre the night of the community barbecue. Every summer, the HOA hosts a neighborhood grill-out at the Central Park. It's usually potluck style, and despite my best efforts to avoid Karen, I figured I'd show up with some smoked ribs and a cooler. Lay low. Meet some normal people. But midway through the evening, Karen approached the mic and tapped it twice like she was about to propose at a wedding. "We have a new resident," she said, looking directly at me as if I'd interrupted her wedding vows. "And while I want to personally welcome him, I also want to remind everyone that community compliance isn't optional. Lake Haven runs smoothly because we adhere to the rules." I raised my beer can in mock toast. A few people chuckled. Karen did not. That night, I got home to find my driveway spray-painted with the words, "Comply or leave," in sloppy yellow block letters. I didn't react. I just checked my cameras, downloaded the footage. Surprise, it wasn't Karen directly. But it was her new community volunteer, a guy named Todd who Karen had suddenly declared the HOA's security liaison. A man whose entire resume appeared to be a mustache and a walkie-talkie. I reported the vandalism to the police. Karen emailed the neighborhood claiming the footage was inconclusive. I forwarded the footage to the insurance company and filed a damage claim anyway. But that's when I realized this wouldn't stop. Karen wasn't just on a power trip. She saw herself as Lake Haven's last line of defense, and I was the invader. So I dug in. I began attending HOA meetings, smiling politely as I took note. I asked seemingly innocent questions about budget allocations, gate maintenance contracts, liability insurance. I made no waves. But behind the scenes, I filed records requests, looked up property codes, and gathered documentation. Because Karen hadn't just closed a gate. She was about to weld it shut. And I was going to make sure someone very official saw it happen. I was outside trimming the bushes, just enough to appease the HOA gods, when I heard the high-pitched screech of a portable welder. That alone wasn't strange. People do home projects. But the sound was coming from the south gate, the one that led to the only secondary emergency exit out of Lake Haven. My stomach dropped as I stepped through the side yard and peered down the street, past rows of manicured lawns and identical mailboxes. Sure enough, there was Todd, Karen's mustachioed attack chihuahua, wearing a safety vest and oversized goggles, squatting beside the gate with a welding torch. Sparks shot out like he was competing on an episode of Forged in Fire. I stood there, watching in slack-jawed disbelief as he sealed the hinge mechanism completely shut, melting the steel into a single fused line. There was no contractor van, no safety signage, just a folding chair, a dented thermos, and a fire hazard in cargo shorts. I walked toward him calmly, snapping a photo from 50 feet away. He didn't hear me over the crackling torch until I was nearly beside him. "Hey Todd," I said. "This part of your resume too, or did Karen hand you a YouTube link?" He jumped like I'd tasered him and fumbled with the welding mask. "This is authorized," he stammered, pulling off the mask and blinking at me. Karen filed a form. I said, taking another picture. "Mind showing me the permit for welding shut a legally mandated fire egress?" "She said it's temporary," Todd muttered. "And I say you're committing a Class B misdemeanor," I replied. "But sure, let's ask someone with an actual badge." Todd scrambled to pack up his gear like I was about to slap the cuffs on him myself. I didn't stop him. I had what I needed. By the time he peeled out of there in his rusted Ford Ranger, the damage was done, and beautifully documented. Welded hinges, scorched grass, and a visible HOA volunteer badge clipped to his waistband. All captured in glorious 4K. I even made sure to get a wide shot showing the emergency exit sign mounted above the now permanently sealed gate. I sent the photos to the county fire marshal's office with a polite, formal email requesting clarification on the legality of obstructing a designated emergency exit. I CC'd the city planning department, the HOA board, and for good measure, the neighborhood's group email thread. Then I sat back with a bowl of popcorn and waited. Karen responded first. Of course. Dear residents, her email began with all the warmth of a tax audit. The South Gate has been closed for necessary security improvements. This decision was reached with full authorization from the HOA leadership. Claims to the contrary are based on misinformation and will be addressed at the next board meeting. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The fire marshal's office responded the next morning. They'd be sending someone to inspect the gate immediately. Now, most people would have taken that as a win. But Karen wasn't most people. She didn't just want control. She needed the appearance of control. The illusion that she was always a step ahead. And my quiet documentation had threatened that. So she did what all great wannabe dictators do when cornered. She doubled down. I woke up to find a notice taped to my door, printed in red ink. You are not authorized to initiate contact with municipal authorities on behalf of the HOA. Cease and desist. It was on official-looking letterhead with her signature in bold script and an HOA watermark I suspect she created in Canva. I didn't even have to open my mouth at the next board meeting. Half the room already thought she'd finally lost the plot. The other half just stared at the photos on my printed report as if Karen had been caught with her hand in the offering plate. I expected her to lay low after that. Maybe lawyer up. But no, Karen launched her next move at full throttle. She issued a new community mandate via email, claiming the entire neighborhood would now operate under Tier 1 security protocols. This included things like nightly gate lockdowns, limited access hours, and, astonishingly, mandatory vehicle registration with HOA-issued decals. There was no vote, no meeting, just an edict from Mount Olympus. My neighbors started panicking. People with early commutes worried they'd be locked in. Amazon drivers got confused by sudden blocked entrances. One poor guy delivering groceries got yelled at by Todd for unauthorized gate tampering when he manually pushed the pedestrian exit open. So I did the only sensible thing. I made a spreadsheet. I compiled timestamps, incidents, photos, gate logs, email threats, and even a screenshot of Karen's Amazon review history. Just for spice. Turns out she had a history of 1-star reviews for dog collars and curtain rods, all with the same tone. Does not meet expectations. Very disappointed. Will escalate. I submitted the spreadsheet to the fire department, and they promised to investigate more thoroughly. Still, nothing happened for 3 days. Then came the barbecue smoke. Literally. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon. A family at the far end of the neighborhood, one of the few who still liked Karen, was hosting a cookout. Someone must have dumped a hot tray of coals into their garbage can. Flames leapt up, melted the side of their recycling bin, and began crawling toward the shrubs lining their fence. Nothing major until the wind kicked up. Then it got serious fast. Someone called 911. I happened to be walking back from the mailbox when the first engine roared down the street toward the sealed south gate. I watched it come to a full stop, lights spinning, horn blaring. The firefighters leapt out with equipment in hand, ready to deploy hoses, and found themselves face to face with the welded gate. No keypad. No way around. Just a solid, metal wall. I could see one of them mouth something that looked a lot like, "You've got to be kidding me." That's when I stepped forward. Phone in hand. "Hi," I said to the lead firefighter, who looked like he was 5 seconds from throwing a hydrant. "I sent your office some photos a few days ago. Including this one." I showed him the shot of Todd welding the gate shut. He blinked, jaw tightening. This was done by the HOA? Unofficially, yes. But under orders from their president. No permit. No contractor. Just her and her security lapdog. He radioed something to dispatch, then turned to his crew and pointed toward the main gate. They jumped back into the truck and reversed course at breakneck speed. I followed them on foot, far enough not to interfere but close enough to see what happened next. When they reached the main gate, which was supposed to be auto-opening for emergency vehicles, they found it locked. Karen had apparently engaged after-hours lockdown protocol 15 minutes early, probably to spite me for walking too close to her precious begonias that morning. And that's when the truck hit the gate. Not gently, not cautiously, full force, like a battering ram. The bars buckled, bent, then snapped off the frame as if made of twigs. Firefighters don't ask permission. They do what needs doing. Within seconds, they were inside the community, extinguishing the fire before it spread to the neighbor's shed. Karen, for her part, emerged moments later in a matching sweatsuit, demanding to know who gave them unauthorized gate access. I'll never forget the look on her face when the fire marshal arrived in a separate vehicle, got out and asked her to confirm her name, and that she was, in fact, president of the HOA. Karen's meltdown over the fire marshal citation would have been popcorn-worthy if it hadn't involved her screaming at a man actively trying to prevent house fires. She turned the sidewalk into her own courtroom, waving printed copies of bylaws no one had ever agreed to, while neighbors hovered at safe distances, pretending to check their mailboxes or water their lawns. You could practically hear the neighborhood's collective soul leaving its body. But the moment the fire marshal drove off, leaving her with a citation the size of a college thesis, she made a beeline for the HOA's clubhouse to draft what I can only assume was an emergency motion to charge the fire department rent. I stayed quiet. Publicly, at least. Privately, I was organizing. My candidacy for HOA president wasn't a reaction. It was a strategy. I'd already read the bylaws twice by then, not because I'm a glutton for punishment, but because if you want to defeat a tyrant, you have to know their weapons better than they do. Karen's power didn't come from logic. It came from momentum. Her entire reign was built on no one having the time or energy to challenge her. People nodded, sighed, paid the fines, and moved on. I wasn't here to move on. The first twist in my campaign came courtesy of Doug. Doug was the treasurer of the HOA, a retiree with a penchant for Sudoku and a deep, abiding fear of confrontation. I found him at the clubhouse 2 days after the fire incident, hunched over a box of receipts like he was decoding the Rosetta Stone. When I walked in and said I was considering running for HOA president, he looked at me like I'd just offered him a ride to freedom. "Oh, thank God," he muttered, pulling me into the tiny utility office and closing the door. "You're not the only one who's sick of Karen, you know." That's when he showed me the ledger. Nothing criminal, Peresi. Just suspicious. Huge overages on beautification projects. Repeated payments to a landscaping company owned by Karen's nephew. A few missing invoices replaced with handwritten notes in loopy cursive. It wasn't enough for legal action, but it was enough to erode trust. I didn't need to expose fraud. I needed to reveal chaos. So I kept digging. I started knocking on doors. Just a few at first. The younger couple down the street with the twin toddlers who'd been fined for having pastel chalk drawings on their driveway. The widower who got dinged for keeping his American flag out past sunset. The sweet woman who Karen accused of noise pollution for letting her wind chimes ring during a storm. All of them had stories. All of them were exhausted. And all of them signed my petition to get on the ballot. By the end of the week, I had the required 25 signatures, plus an unofficial campaign slogan, courtesy of the dad with twins. Anybody but Karen. It wasn't elegant, but it was effective. Karen, of course, wasn't about to let me run without a fight. She called a special emergency session of the board, where she attempted to pass an amendment requiring all HOA candidates to have lived in the neighborhood for at least 1 year. Never mind that the bylaws clearly stated the requirement was 6 months. Never mind that she herself had joined the board 4 months after moving in years ago. Logic was Karen's mortal enemy. I showed up to the meeting with a copy of the original bylaws highlighted and tabbed. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply read the rules aloud, like I was narrating a bedtime story for delusional adult. When Karen objected, claiming I was misinterpreting the spirit of the regulations, I replied, "If the spirit of the rules disagrees with the letter of the rules, maybe it needs an exorcism." She tried to table the vote. The rest of the board, who'd finally seen the writing on the wall, voted her down. And just like that, I was officially on the ballot. Karen didn't campaign in the traditional sense. She didn't host meet and greets or distribute flyers. Instead, she did what she knew best: weaponized fear. She circulated a letter warning residents that outside influences were trying to dismantle the delicate harmony of Lake Haven. She hinted, without naming names, that my background in construction meant I had conflicts of interest and might sell community assets for personal gain. She even implied I was part of some larger movement to destabilize residential governance. You'd think I was leading a paramilitary HOA coup. So I responded in kind. Calmly. Thoroughly. I built a website. Clean, transparent, and user-friendly. It broke down HOA expenditures, explained what bylaws actually said, and included a survey where residents could vote anonymously on what changes they wanted. Over 100 responses came in within the first 3 days. People weren't just angry. They were ready. At the next HOA meeting, I presented the survey result. 84% wanted the gate policy revised. 72% wanted fines capped. 90% wanted the board term limits reinstated, because, surprise, Karen had removed them the year she took over. That one landed like a grenade. The turning point, though, came at the candidate forum. It was supposed to be a polite Q&A in the clubhouse, chairs arranged in neat rows, lemonade on a folding table. But halfway through, Karen, red-faced and sweating under the harsh fluorescence, stood up and accused me of colluding with the fire department to embarrass her. "Tell them," she shouted, jabbing a manicured finger in my direction. "You coordinated that whole fire thing. You're trying to make me look negligent." I blinked slowly. "Are you saying I started the fire, Karen?" The room fell silent. She paused. "Too long." "I'm saying you used it." Someone in the back chuckled. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. I just turned to the residents and said, "Folks, I've done a lot of things in my life. But I've never orchestrated a small appliance fire to win a local election. If I were that good at planning, I wouldn't be running for HOA president. I'd be ruling a small country." The room erupted. Some in laughter, others in applause. Karen sat down hard, like someone had pulled the strings from a marionette. After that, it was over. The votes were cast the following week. The final tally, 82-16. I won by a landslide. Todd was the first to slink away, disappearing like a stain under bleach. Karen didn't show up to the results meeting. Instead, she sent a short email announcing her immediate and indefinite leave of absence due to hostile community behavior. No apology. No handoff. Just a digital middle finger and radio silence. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The win wasn't about beating Karen. It was about giving everyone else their neighborhood back. But I wasn't done. My first act as president? I held a vote to remove the welded gate and replace it with a fully code-compliant, double-wide emergency exit monitored by the city's emergency services. Unanimous approval. My second act? I reintroduced term limits. Karen's reign was over. But the repair work had only just begun. Because power, when abused long enough, doesn't just break rules. It breaks people. And I wasn't going to let that happen again. 3 days after I was sworn in as HOA president, I got a letter taped to my door in a manila envelope that smelled faintly of lavender and fury. It was from Karen. Typed, signed, and sealed with a dab of wax like she was the queen of HOAlandia. The letter accused me of leading a community-wide insurrection, of defaming her leadership legacy, and of willfully degrading the aesthetic and ideological values upon which Lake Haven was built. Then, bizarrely, it threatened to involve a lawyer if I didn't cease retaliatory governance. I read the whole thing twice while eating a bowl of cereal. My favorite part was the phrase, retaliatory governance, which I imagined must be lawyer speak for cleaning up someone else's mess. I didn't respond. There was nothing to respond to. Karen was no longer president, no longer on the board. She'd chosen to isolate herself, and now she was a paper tiger growling from behind her lace curtains. Still, her letter wasn't without consequences. It marked the start of a slow, bitter resistance. It began subtly. One morning the landscapers didn't show up. I called the company Karen's nephew owned, because yes, nepotism was still baked into the system, and they claimed the contract had been suspended due to unpaid invoices. I pulled the payment history and discovered Karen had prepaid them 3 months in advance, then canceled the automatic renewal. The message was clear. She'd spent money ahead of time to guarantee things broke under my watch. Then came the real kicker, what I called the phantom fine operation. Residents started finding anonymous notes in their mailboxes. Not official citations, just printouts of vague, threatening messages like violation, excessive window tinting, or unapproved garden ornamentation must be removed. No HOA letterhead, no signature, just eerily specific accusations. I knew it wasn't the board. I hadn't approved anything, and Doug, now fully committed as treasurer, confirmed that no official notices had gone out. The handwriting was printed in Comic Sans, Karen's favorite font. It wasn't exactly hard to trace. At first, I thought the neighborhood would ignore her. But people were nervous. After years under her rule, even the hint of a citation was enough to make folks panic. The system she'd built was one of punishment and paranoia. Undoing it would take more than one election. So I went on the offensive. I called an open forum meeting. No agenda, no votes, just coffee, snacks, and honesty. I stood up in front of 30 residents in the clubhouse and said, let's be clear. No one's getting fined for gnomes, or chalk drawings, or what color their mulch is. The HOA exists to serve the community, not terrorize it. We're not a regime. We're neighbors. There was a long pause. Then the dad of the twin toddlers raised his hand. Can we get gnomes again? Get 100, I said. Stage them like a nativity scene. I don't care as long as they're not setting off fireworks. Laughter broke out. The tension cracked. People started talking, sharing, asking actual questions about how things work. And just like that, Karen's shadow started to lift. But she wasn't done. Because that very night, at 2:13 a.m., someone cut the power to the south gate. Not just disabled it, cut the line. Clean slice, like someone had taken bolt cutters to the control box. The backup battery was smashed. The keypad was destroyed. The entire mechanism shorted out, locking the gate permanently open. Todd's truck was spotted driving away from the scene by 3 different Ring cameras. But the grainy footage wasn't enough for police to press charges. Still, the implication was clear. Karen wasn't fighting to reclaim power. She was trying to burn the system down on her way out. I called an emergency meeting. This time, it was to approve funds for a full security overhaul. We needed tamper-proof gate systems, high-res cameras, and encrypted access logs. It passed unanimously. But we still needed to address the bigger issue, the growing pile of past violations Karen had racked up and hidden from public record. I dove into the HOA archives. Most of it was a disaster. Paper files, overlapping spreadsheets, even a few floppy disks that Doug confessed he'd been too sentimental to toss. But once I digitized it all and sorted by address, I saw a pattern. Karen had selectively enforced rules. Certain houses, mostly her friends and loyalists, were never cited. Others had hundreds of dollars in fines racked up over the years for nonsense infractions. It got worse. Turns out, the HOA had a policy for lien escalation. If fines weren't paid within 90 days, a lien could be placed on the property. 2 homes had been hit with those liens during Karen's reign. Both were owned by single mothers. Both had later sold their homes under financial pressure. Both sales had quietly resulted in Karen's nephew, yes, the same landscaping nephew, buying the properties through a consulting firm he owned. That's when it stopped being petty. It became a pattern. I gathered the evidence. I brought it to the board. And we made a unanimous decision to bring in an outside auditor. Not just to review finances, but to dig into HOA board behavior and legal compliance over the last 5 years. Karen must have caught wind. Because the very next day my mailbox exploded. Not metaphorically. Someone shoved a lit M80 inside it. It blew the door clean off and left a scorch mark on the sidewalk. I filed a police report, handed over the security footage, and installed a new reinforced box with a motion-activated camera pointing right at it. No one was arrested. But the message was clear. Karen wasn't above escalation. And I wasn't above pressing charges. But while she raged, I made progress. We dissolved all vendor contracts tied to her family. We capped fines at reasonable levels. We rewrote the bylaw language to eliminate ambiguity and stripped the president of unilateral enforcement powers. Every change passed with overwhelming support. And then, the final twist. One of the properties Karen's nephew had acquired, remember those lien sales? Went back on the market. The consulting firm flipped it, clearly hoping for a quick profit. Except I happened to know a guy on the real estate side of things, and that guy happened to let me know that the listing had hit a snag. The property had never been properly cleared of HOA liens. The title was frozen until someone reviewed the original claim, which, by now, had become very public. I brought the matter to a community vote. According to the bylaws, any HOA-imposed lien still in legal dispute could be contested by the general body. And guess what? With the audit already underway, the residents voted 65-1 to formally challenge both original liens as fraudulently motivated. That tied up the sale indefinitely. The firm lost its buyer. Karen's nephew pulled the house from the market and, a week later, filed paperwork to dissolve his business. Karen never spoke at another meeting. Never responded to another notice. But the funniest part? She still lived here. Still walked her schnauzer past my house, now avoiding eye contact. Her reign was over, her empire dismantled, but she refused to leave. It was like watching a retired queen walk through a palace where no one bowed anymore. And I left her alone. Because I didn't need revenge. I had the gate fixed, the rules rewritten, the fines refunded. And every time she passed me, clutching her little dog like a talisman, I'd wave. Calmly. Quietly. The long game was over. And I'd won. You'd think the story would have ended there. After all, Karen had lost her crown, her influence, her creepy henchmen, and most of her manufactured power. But if there's one thing I've learned about people like Karen, it's this. They don't know how to lose. Not really. They don't process it like normal people. They don't sulk, rebuild, or take a good long look in the mirror. They scheme. They stew. They wait for just enough time to pass before trying to pull off one last dramatic encore, convinced that maybe, just maybe, everyone's memory is shorter than their grudge. Karen's came 6 months later. Long enough for the neighborhood to relax, for real improvements to take root, for people to start saying things like, "This is the nicest the community's ever looked," and "It actually feels peaceful now." The gates had been fully replaced with city-approved emergency access. The HOA finances were balanced for the first time in years. We had volunteers for the board, community potlucks without drama, and an actual playground installed where Karen's visionary gazebo was once supposed to go. Things were good. So of course she tried to blow it all up. It started with a rumor. A whisper that Karen was considering a return to service. That she'd seen the error of her ways and wanted to help restore balance. Naturally, she hadn't said any of this publicly. That would have required vulnerability. Instead, she let it leak through her 2 remaining allies, Edith and Roy, an elderly couple who'd once helped organize the 4th of July picnic and still believed Karen was misunderstood. Then came the flyers. glossy, professional, and anonymous. Slipped under doors and into mailboxes late at night. No name, no direct accusations, just vague statements like, "Is the HOA really working for you?" And "Let's bring experience back to the table." Experience. As if Karen's reign had been some golden age instead of a fever dream. Most residents rolled their eyes. Some tossed them. But a handful of the newer folks, ones who hadn't lived through the Firegate saga, actually started asking questions. Who was this experienced candidate? Why hadn't they heard the full story? Wasn't it time for new leadership? I didn't panic. I didn't campaign. I let the flyers come. Because I knew what was coming next. A surprise nomination. The HOA's annual election meeting was held in the clubhouse, just like always. Attendance was solid, about 50 residents, the usual coffee and cookies, and a calm, almost sleepy energy in the air. Until, during the new nominations portion of the evening, Edith stood up and cleared her throat with theatrical flair. "I'd like to nominate Karen Delacroix for the position of HOA president." A gasp, followed by stunned silence. Karen, seated quietly near the back in a tasteful beige blazer like she hadn't once tried to sabotage a fire truck, offered a prim smile and raised one hand in an elegant half-wave. I let it hang in the air for a beat, then stood. "I accept the nomination," Karen said smoothly, before I even opened my mouth. "I know I've made mistakes in the past. But I truly believe Lake Haven deserves a leader with experience." I looked at her for a moment, then turned to the crowd. "You know what?" I said. "Let's vote." Karen blinked. She'd expected resistance. Argument. An effort to block her on some technicality. But not this. "No speeches?" she asked, voice cool but suspicious. "No need," I said. "Your resume speaks for itself." The ballots were distributed. Secret, as always. I watched them come in, one by one. The room was silent except for the occasional cough and the rustle of paper. And then, 10 minutes later, Doug counted them. Karen, 8 votes. Me, 42. 2 abstained. Karen sat perfectly still, lips pressed into a straight line. She didn't make a scene. Didn't protest. She just stood up, collected her purse, and walked out of the clubhouse without a word. The door closed softly behind her. It was the most graceful thing I'd ever seen her do. And yet, I didn't celebrate. Because I knew, this time, she'd finally understood. Not that I was her better, or that I'd outsmarted her. But that the neighborhood had. That the system she'd twisted for years had turned on her not because of me, but because she'd exhausted everyone else's patience. They were done living under the rule of fear. Done being bullied, fined, and ignored. She hadn't just lost an election. She'd lost the myth of inevitability. But the real epilogue came a week later. I got a call from the city's fire department. One of the senior officials I'd worked with during the gate debacle was retiring, and he wanted to know if I'd be willing to speak at a local governance panel he was organizing. Topic: When neighborhood power goes off the rails. I agreed. The panel was held at a community college auditorium, modest but packed. Other HOA presidents, city officials, planners. And in the middle of my talk, just as I was explaining the logic behind transparent governance, a woman slipped in through the side door and sat in the back row. Karen. She stayed the entire time. Didn't take notes. Didn't make a scene. Just listened. Afterward, while people mingled and shook hands, she approached me slowly. I braced for it. A final jab, maybe. One more condescending monologue. But instead, she said 4 simple words. "You did it right." I looked at her. No sarcasm. No smugness. Just a woman who'd built an empire out of insecurity and watched it fall apart. Maybe she meant it. Maybe it was a peace offering. Or maybe it was just closure. "Thanks," I said. We didn't shake hands. She didn't linger. She turned and left. And that was the last time I ever saw Karen Delacroix. These days, Lake Haven's HOA meetings are shorter. Friendlier. Sometimes even fun. We have volunteers who actually want to help, and budgets that make sense. Our biggest argument last month was whether to replace the duck-shaped pool float with something less tacky. We settled on a swan. I still walk past Karen's house sometimes. It's well kept, quiet. No more notes taped to doors. No more clipboard patrols. Just a trimmed lawn, a faded flag, and a potted fern by the steps. Maybe that's how she wants it now. Or maybe she's planning something with the fern. I don't care either way. Because the gates are open. The bylaws are fair. And in this tiny corner of suburbia once ruled by ego and fear, peace doesn't look like power. It looks like gnomes on lawns, kids riding scooters, and neighbors who actually wave back.